intend to go into a little discussed theme in our part of the world. And this is the need to preserve local ways of reciting the Qur'an. And in fact, it is encouraged in the Qur'an itself, and also through the traditions of the Prophet, that we must intone the Qur'an in a beautiful that avoids excesses or any forms of extremes, because this tartil or recitation helps the believers in concentrating on the meanings of the verses of the Quran. And virtually every Muslim cultural group has its own unique way of reciting the Quran within the framework of the prescriptions of both the Quran itself and also the advice of the Prophet. In fact, the Prophet himself also had his own favorite reciters, where he would ask them, to recite part of the Quran while he listened to them. Not to listen to them to correct them, because they really needed no correction. They worked within the prescriptions of the Prophet himself. What this means is that we are allowed to develop our own geographical or regional forms of tartil, of recitation, and this has happened in various parts of the world. When you hear a particular tartil, then you know that, for example, this is Somali tartil, this is Sudanese. So there were also Swahili tartil, and specific people were very famous for this. And even certain areas were well known for these kinds of people. And here in Kenya, the people of Shela on Lamu Island were famous for this, because they had a much longer tradition of memorizing the Quran more than the other places. So because of the poverty of individuals like this, every Ramadan in certain mosques, you found these Shela reciters who had been invited to come and spend the whole month of Ramadan leading the Taraweeh prayers and going through the entire Quran. There is a need to preserve these forms of tartil, and there are people who still continue with this tradition. For example, now in Lamu, there are people, not only from Shela, but in central Lamu itself. And they've tried to continue that tradition. For very maybe political, historical, sociological reasons, there has developed forms of tartil that are unique and that have now almost become universal. And these forms of tartil have the danger of completely wiping out local variations of these tartil. And people who have promoted these forms of tartil are actually the Salafi, the Saudis. So Saudi reciters, global and universal, in their appeal. For example, if there are children's competitions on Tartil, you will find that they will be copying, prominent names like Hudhaifi, Sudais. In fact, Sudais is the most important one. And then, of course, they get the greatest opportunity of displaying their form of Tartil during the Tarawih prayers in Ramadan. So to them, that's a godsend, literally, where everybody would be listening to them, and people from different parts of the world. And then, of course, that has literally swamped any local forms of Tartil. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I think this is something that we need to debate, because we should not have just one way of reciting the Qur'an. Like we have the Egyptian Tartil, we have the Sudanese, we have the Somali, and so on and so forth. So this should be given space in which to thrive and also be better known, because this is part of culture. If you have that aspect, that also gives you your identity as Muslims of a particular place. It doesn't mean that you are inferior, but it shows the creativity of the people who developed those forms of Tartil. And they have been with us for centuries. These are not things that... and then, of course, they have also evolved. There are popular local reciters who have, again, carved a place for themselves, within the local culture. And then this is part of the Islamic continuum of Tartil, because there's not really one way of reciting the Qur'an. There are various ways, and they all, as we said, work within the prescriptions of what the Qur'an itself says, and also what the Prophet himself told us. I myself like some of these Salafi reciters, and have had the privilege of not only liking them, but actually praying behind them. That was one of the greatest pleasures, that I got. And my favorite was Hudhaifi. So if you listened to his much younger days, it was more attractive than when I went to listen to him. But in Medina, but that doesn't deny them, the fact that they were institutions in their own right. People sought them out. They wanted to listen to their unique recitations. But if you listen to the much older ones, then you find older versions of the younger versions, if you like, of themselves. They're quite different and absolutely appealing. And then, of course, you have somebody like Sudais. Again, he's got his own style. But unfortunately, when younger people try to learn Tartil, they end up just copying a handful of these Saudi reciters. I'm not saying they are bad, but I think they tend to overwhelm, local traditions of recitation. And sometimes they're just, the recitations are there really for ideological reasons, rather than purely as an aesthetic, as a spiritual experience. My appeal is that we should encourage as many of our own local versions of the Tartil as is possible. And even within the local ones, they are not just one or two. They are different depending upon which area you come from. So I'm sure if you came from Vanga or from Pemba or Zanzibar, you are likely to, as much as you are likely to get a local variation, for example, in Central Province or in other parts of the country, because this is part of the national heritage. Just like we listen, to the choirs, the Christian choirs, they are again influenced by the trends they consider to be real Christian countries, like Britain, because they associate Christianity with the British. They don't assume that this is a Middle Eastern religion, just like Islam or like Judaism. And of course those people also reinforce that. So they would like the choir members to sing like those in the choir in Westminster Abbey. So I think we should encourage local traditions of Tartil. And there are, I'm told, just last Ramadan, there was a young man from Mombasa or from Lamu who had this unique way of reciting. And I'm sure that must have attracted the attention of the people, even listening to the Qur'an, because if it is Sudais, everybody can recite like Sudais, but they said, wait a minute, now this is different, and it sounds beautiful, I hope he's not condemned for reciting, outside the conventional or the presumed standard way of reciting, which is the Sudais or Hudayfi way. I still like Hudayfi. I still continue listening to him. Some of the most famous of the Qaris include Muhammad Khalil al-Husari, who dominated the 1970s, 1980s, and I think almost 1990s. His was a very calm and balanced recitation of the Qur'an, and he was one of my favorite, and I listened to him as often as I could, because at that time you just went and recorded, or bought a CD or cassette, and then you can put it and listen to him whenever you want. And then, of course, there were those melodious reciters like Abdul Basit, Abdul Samad, very, very popular. And also Mustafa Ismail and Hafiz Ismail. And the interesting thing is that in Egypt, reciters like Abdul Basit, Abdul Samad were invited to solemn occasions, like when people were grieving, for their loved ones, who passed away. So they would be invited to come and recite the Quran, and people will listen, and often they will recite the relevant verses on death, for example, or thinking about the hereafter, and so on and so forth. And these were all household names in the Islamic world. And of course there were local versions of reciters who tried to copy Abdul Basit, Abdul Samad, or Mustafa Ismail. Just like today most people tried to copy Sudes. At that time, these were the dominating qaris who were beloved, for their tartil. One of the most famous of the reciters and beloved of these reciters is or was Mohamed Sharif Rashad, who was a Palestinian and was the Imam of Masjid al-Aqsa. It was very, very popular, and in fact was transferred from where he came from and given the imamship of Masjid al-Aqsa, one of the most revered and sacred spots in Islamic history, spirituality and intellectual tradition. When I was the Vice Chancellor in Kisaju, I had to travel for 2 hours, going and returning. And one of my greatest pleasures was to put Hudhaifi, and listen to his recitation and maybe follow him. And this is also another beautiful way of memorizing the Qur'an. I hope this would inspire, future reciters, who want to follow the tradition of the tartil as described in the Qur'an itself and through the prescriptions of the Prophet himself.